Hello, everyone. Tom Hall here, Executive Director, Montclair Film and the Montclair Film Festival. Thank you for joining us for the Q&A for City So Real. I hope you enjoyed the film. I'm here with the film's producer, Zach Piper.
Hello.
And the film's director, Steve James.
Hi there.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it.
Great to be here.
So I want to get started talking a little bit about the form of the film. Steve, you've been known throughout the years as a sort of master storyteller in long-form nonfiction. I think of films like the long follows like Hoop Dreams, or recently America to Me, which was like a bit of a longer follow story of a single institution and the people who inhabit it. This movie feels much wider in its scope because of the number of subjects that you guys undertook. How did that impact your approach to the movie? Because I know that you traditionally are a very small crew. You do most of the work yourselves, both of you. How are you able to create a process for yourselves so that you could be present for all of the things that happened in this film? Because it's pretty incredible in its scope.
Well, we pretty much did it the same way we always do, very small crews. Now, we had other people who helped us with it who played important roles, like my son Jackson James, who was a DP on it, Kevin Shaw, who was also working on it as a DP. But we still maintained this very small approach. Usually two people out, and oftentimes it was me and Zach. And, you know, we knew that there would be no way we could follow all these candidates. We didn't want to follow them all. There was too many of them. So we identified ones that really particularly interested us, and we reached out to them. We also identified some that we thought were serious contenders that we should reach out to. And, you know, we had less luck with the serious contenders than we did with the people that came from nowhere, including our current mayor, Lori Lightfoot. And that was fine with us because we knew those other folks would be in the film regardless. We would show up at their events and capture them. We just wouldn't have the kind of access. And we didn't want to do a pure political election film. I hope that people don't see this that way, that it's trying to get its arms around the kind of process of politics in Chicago, with some intimate access to some of the subjects. But we also wanted this to be a kind of mosaic portrait of the city itself and the people here and in this particular moment. And there were many days when, if Zach and I were going out, which was frequently, we'd have something to do at the beginning of the day that we knew we were going to do. We had no idea where we'd end up the day. And we really came to thrive on that and love that aspect of making this film.
I would just add one example of, you know, a way that this process was different from other films, other verite type films, where there's just this scene with the shoe shine, the shoe shine shop scene, and how that all came to be was it was in the basement of the Chicago Board of Elections building, and we were down there filming a press conference where they often hold them, and we were leaving, and this Maine, the guy who is working at the shop, he said, "Hey guys, I want to tell you a few things." So we just walked. I mean, this project allowed the freedom for us to walk over and record for real. Like, we weren't just humoring him; we were actually interested in, and it turned into us coming back and filming a scene there.
And so in terms of like the amount of footage that you shot and the amount of footage that you ended up using, were you able to be somewhat judicious in your planning? I know you were responding to events or whatever, but how it seems like there would be so much material to cover to sort of lay out the narrative here because of these sort of the juxtaposition of sort of the public facing campaign stuff, but also the public itself, which is sort of responding to the city, the environment, etc. How much footage was there, and how did you guys make your way through it?
Well, we're still adding to it. We just shot this past weekend, and we have to lock picture on episode 5 next Sunday, a week from
6 days.
6 days from now. So we're a little crazy with that. I mean, we've shot, oh God, I don't know. We've shot certainly well over 400 hours at this point. But the funny thing about this is, and we recognized this when we were doing it, at first it was kind of maddening, and then we kind of just embraced it. which is you can't do it all. Nobody can do a portrait of this city that is comprehensive and gets to every nook and cranny and gets at everything that you'd want to get at, unless we keep making this series for the next 10 years, and it's like, and we had to embrace the fact that, and that's why we adopted this more serendipitous approach to the filmmaking. It's like, yes, we were going to follow the election. Yes, we were going to follow the Laquan McDonald trial, but we were also going to just let whatever happened lead us where it led us and embrace that. And we tried to preserve that in the way in which we edited the film together, that sense of freedom that I hope comes across in the viewing of the film, that you don't quite know where you're going to go next. And because we didn't know where we were going to go next. And so, yeah, we shot a ton of stuff between us and our colleagues. Our first rough cut was 12 hours long or something. And we did pretty good. We got it down to 4+ hours.
Yeah.
But there's also obviously a narrative that you're building when you decided to go episodic with this and create 4 sort of chapters so far, and like you mentioned, there's a 5th one coming, and we'll talk about more about that later. But when you decided to go episodic, how did that impact the structure of your edit? Because this, it doesn't have like a regular sort of cliffhanger cliche, but it allows you to catch your breath and you want to jump right back into the next episode to see what's going to happen next in a very interesting way, because the narrative sort of ends on these moments of, I don't know, they're diverse across the four different episodes in terms of the ending moments. How did you guys structure that in the edit? It seems like you said you got it down from a lot of hour, a 10-hour cut to 4, but.
Well, that's a great question. When we were shooting it, the idea was this is going to be a standalone documentary. But the more we shot, the more it seemed like, God, how are we going to possibly do justice to all this in a standalone documentary? And so, fortunately, our partners at Participant, who funded the film, Diane Wireman in particular, when we showed her some of what we had gotten once we got in the early stages of editing and said, we kind of think this is a docuseries, she immediately got it and said, yes, it is. So that helped. And then in terms of how we structure it, I think, first of all, I had a tremendous co-editing colleague in David Simpson. He's one of the most talented documentary, especially verite. He's good at everything, but he's one of the best editors there is in our world. And he and I have worked together a lot over the years. And so I don't think we could have pulled this off without him and his tremendous skill set. But, I think we really ended up thinking of it as like one long movie, but we wanted to find provocative places to leave you at the end of episodes because we don't have cliffhangers that would, encourage it. I'm happy to hear that made you want to dive back in, because that's what we want. We wanted you to get to the end of an episode and feel like you've gotten something satisfying, but like, okay, what's next? And I think, that was something we really kind of learned how to do on America to Me, because that miniseries also didn't have cliffhangers, and that was 10 hours long. And we had to figure out how to get in and out of episodes in a way that, we're always thinking about how do we start an episode so that you are like, yes, we're going. And how do you end an episode so that it's like, yes, I want to see the next episode.
And I would just add also that I think that with this being episodic and not just a standalone film, it really allowed the place for these more portrait type scenes, that if we were in a single standalone film, it would have been more difficult because all the news, the cycle, the ups and downs of the campaign would be driving us forward. We wouldn't have necessarily the space to do these portraits where we kind of step back, and meet people and go interesting places and to get a flavor of the city, So I think that the episodic nature helps with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there probably would be no dog walker scene in the standalone
totally
version of this.
Exactly. So my next question sort of concerns the what's the right word? Texture of the movie in terms of it being a portrait. You've made a lot of films in Chicago. I mean, it's your home base. the home base of your company. But I'm wondering if, when you made this movie, your vision of the city changed at all, or you discovered not necessarily a new beat or a new moment or a new sort of texture, like I was saying, to the city, but something like fundamentally transformed. I think, for example, the Laquan McDonald verdict and that whole process that really sets this movie into motion was a transformative moment for the country. And so this is sort of the aftermath of that on the public space, both, and by public space I mean politicians running for office, but also people in public spaces talking about the decision or their understanding of what's going on in their own city. And it was very interesting to see the differences in range of engagement that were going on. I'm just wondering if you had a revelation or some sort of transformation of your own thinking about Chicago by making this movie.
Well, you ask hard questions.
Oh.
They didn't want
Thanks.
I mean, this applies to every film I do, and it certainly applies in, doubly to this film, as I feel like I learn so much every time we go out to make a film, no matter what you think you know. And I wasn't, I was humble enough to know for myself that there's so little I do know about Chicago, even though I've lived here all these years and made a number of films about it. That there's just so many aspects to the city and the people that live here and the neighborhoods and what goes on that this was a hugely educational experience for me as a person and as a filmmaker. I think some of the things that really surprised me the most, one for sure, was the petition process. I knew about the petition process. I had no idea. I really didn't know about the petition process. I mean, it is such a Byzantine political blood sport that Zach and I joked we could have made a Frederick Wiseman film just called Board of Elections. We spent a lot of time down there, yes. And it, so that was a revelation for me in the political sphere of like, wow, this, and we came to see it as standing for the process itself in a kind of the Chicago way political process itself.
Zach, how about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, echoing a lot of what Steve said, that I think, anytime you make a film, especially a film over such a long period of time where you're covering so much ground, there's a lot to learn. I do think that, in your question regarding the engagement of folks around the Laquan McDonald trial, I mean, I think that there wasn't a total surprise, that where I guess for me, the surprise was just sort of how extreme our experience was in that, in the sense of like, that white Chicago, in our, experience of going out and talking to folks, were really shockingly not paying attention because there wasn't any, real impact on the day-to-day life. And I think that, that's an extremely important detail to include, that sort of helps round out, how we talk about and think about issues like the Laquan McDonald murder.
I to just piggyback on what Zach said, it's like, it didn't shock us that they weren't as engaged. It did shock me how utterly unengaged,
like completely
were,
clueless.
Because they lived in neighborhoods where that never was going to be a concern, but even though it was roiling the city and the political structure and Black Chicago especially, it just kind of was like, that's something that has nothing to do with me.
Yeah. And personally, it makes me think about other issues that right now, as I sit here, that I'm totally clueless about, that I should know about and be more engaged on. You know what I mean? Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
As Steve, you've documented the African American community pretty profoundly through a lot of your films. This film, just in the way that you're describing me in terms of making it, I didn't know that before we started talking. being able to pop in and out of events and follow your nose and follow the scent of what's going on around you. I'm assuming like trust building on a project like Hoop Dreams is a lot different than what was going on here. Maybe with the candidates that you spent a little bit more time with, there was a trust building process. But as a white filmmaker documenting sort of the Black community in Chicago, that comes with a lot of responsibility and a lot of self-analysis that you have to do with your approach and with your footage. I'm wondering if you feel like you've learned those lessons over time. Were they changed on this project? How did City So Real work for you as compared to your other projects that have documented this community?
Sure. I mean, great question. I mean, we're living in a moment in our field, as well as many of the arts fields, of real reckoning and trying to understand who should tell stories and how stories should be told, and what role white filmmakers have in telling those stories, and what role maybe they should step back from. And I've certainly learned a lot over the years around that, and I've been particularly struck in the last year and done a lot of soul searching and thinking about that. And the way it impacted my work is that it started with America to me, most principally, is to try and do more work where I involve filmmakers of color deeply in the creative process, and even share directing credit. That happened on America to me. On this film, it didn't work out that way because we started out to do a standalone film and did not think it would become the ambitious monster that it did. But nonetheless, we did have a diverse team in the field producers, Kevin Shaw, who I mentioned, who was one of the shooters. And some of those moments like the Black Barbershop, for example, that in all likelihood would not have happened had Kevin not shot that, had Sylvetta Christmas, one of our field producers, not been there. Even Bailey, who was a Black sound person that did sound in addition to Zach. I was there, but if we hadn't had that crew there, I think those guys might have been more reluctant to go where they went with that conversation. And so there is a difference between being a white filmmaker in certain settings and being a filmmaker of color, a sensitive filmmaker of color in certain settings. But one of the things I think I've found over the years, and I think we certainly tried to put it in practice here, is that we approach people, regardless of their race, with the idea that we don't know anything. We're there to understand. We're there to learn. We're there to engage with them. I could never be a Frederick Wiseman style filmmaker because I like talking to people too much. I could never be the fly on the wall. Because a big part of the joy of doing this work is to engage with people, because I'm really curious about people, and the same applies to Zach. And so that's one of the real joys of it. And I think when people believe in what you're doing, because we would explain to people, we were out the other day shooting in a neighborhood and we just told people what we were doing. Mm-hmm. We didn't just ambush them and get shots. We went up to them and we said, hey, we're doing this series. The last episode, in the last scene in the series, is going to take place down the block. Mm-hmm. We want to get some shots of the block, of people out. This is, here it is, City So Real. You can go look it up. This is what we're doing. How would you feel about us filming you guys out front here? And some people said, I prefer not. We were like, great, thank you. And many other people were like, sure, yeah. And they enjoyed it. So I think candor and honesty and forthrightness and humility are important characteristics, no matter what film situation you go into. But I think they particularly are important when you are crossing boundaries of class and race.
I would just add one more detail onto this, which is that another aspect of the process, which I do think is important, especially in this series, just because, well, it's always important, but that most folks who have key scenes, for the most part, that appear in this series, had a chance to take a look at the scene prior to it being released into the world. So there was an opportunity for folks to tell us about any issues or anything we may have missed or misrepresenting something. And I think that not all filmmakers do that, but I think it's a really critical piece in, making sure that what you're presenting is accurate.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Zach, because we don't present it to them and say we want permission and editorial control. We're not handing over editorial control, but we're very sincere about saying to them, we want you to feel like this is true to who you are. And if you have issues with it, let's talk about it. And we've changed things over the years in films because of that process. And I would say that in every case, the film has gotten better as a result of that process. Some people, get back to us and say, it's fine, I love it, which we like that. But other people get back and say, you know what, you've got this, and I feel like that's not really what I was trying to say there. And it's like, okay, let's get it to what you wanted to say there. And sometimes you have to say, I know that's a tough scene, but I feel like it has to be in the film. Sometimes that's happened, but you'd be surprised at how rare that is. Well, maybe you wouldn't, but I'm always surprised at how rare that is, because I find that people are incredibly, in the documentaries that we've been making, people are incredibly courageous and open and willing to put themselves out there in honest ways, if they feel like they're being treated fairly and honestly.
I think it's interesting too, because I think people are getting more and more image savvier about what they're putting out into the world, and there's this sort of now social media facade that's in front of everybody. And I'm interested to see a film like this, where you have access to so many political public figures who are putting themselves out there in public, but also in private moments to you in authentic ways. And can you talk a little bit about how you navigated the sort of insincerity of politics with the sort of intimate personalities of these subjects, because they really shine in. I don't see a lot of conflict between the private selves that we see and the public selves that we see when we see them, and not always. But I do see that sort of tension, and you're always asking yourself, what sort of politician would let a documentary film crew behind the scenes? This isn't like the news where they're going to get coverage out of it. It's going to come out a year later. Right. So you just wonder, what are they thinking about giving you access?
Well, yeah, no, you're right. In fact, some of the higher end candidates who were considered to be front runners, they would initially be really friendly to us, and then they'd find out what it is we were doing, and they'd be like, no thanks. Because for a couple of reasons. One is just what you said, what we were doing wasn't going to help them get elected. Two, they actually believed, I think, that they had a really serious shot at being elected, and they did not want to run the risk of showing a side of themselves to us that could come back to bite them as mayor of Chicago. I think the people that embraced us, the candidates that embraced us, tended to be more marginalized candidates, at least in the public view. And they also loved the idea of what we were doing, because we told them, we didn't say we're gonna do this political film and it's gonna be all about your campaign. And we said, we're doing a portrait of Chicago. We were really clear about what we were doing, and that this is a vitally important part of it, and we want you to participate. And they dug the idea. They were like, that's cool, and so they wanted to be a part of that, I think, as much because they're Chicagoans, and they liked what we were up to as much as thinking there was trying to calculate any value for them personally.
Yeah, I've a couple more questions for you. The first one is, so the text of the film is Chicago. It's not called Chicago. It's called City So Real. And I think, it's impossible to watch this movie without thinking about the country as a whole in terms of race relations, politics, the process, democratic participation or lack thereof, engagement like we talked about earlier. But America's not really a metaphor per se in this movie. Chicago is a sort of stand-in for America in general. It's one place that's got its own unique dynamics, but it's also sort of a stand-in for the country as a whole. And I'm wondering how much, you mentioned you didn't want to make a political film about the process, but it certainly feels like a film about our political moment. Can you maybe discuss how you navigated what to include as sort of news broke after the film was finished and the texture, that the country changed and the tenor of things. You feel like every 5 minutes we're living in a new America with new facts and new rules. I'm wondering how America impacted your process.
Zach, why don't you?
I feel like that question is most relevant, at least in my mind, to episode 5, the episode that's still in progress and still being cut and shot. Yeah, amazingly, we're going to be out, I think, later this week doing some filming. But and honestly, I feel like we're still navigating that a little bit. I mean, certainly, I do think that it's a true statement to say that what's happening in Chicago right now and seemingly unfolding new developments by the day is a stand-in for the country. Not just, in one sense, it's, at the political level, it's like the absolute total dysfunction, and sort of like maybe like lack of preparation for this moment. I think on the other hand, it's a lot of the passion, the anger, the outrage, absolutely is, obviously resonating around the country as well. And the question, I think the other part of your question about, how do you make decisions about what to include and what not to include? I mean, we were on a phone call this morning for an hour and a half talking about those very things, and I think it's still in progress. But since Steve's got his hands on the controls there, maybe he could weigh in on that a little bit too.
Well, just to add to it, to say, Chicago has been referred to as the quintessential American city, right? It's I don't know who came up with that, but it's been around for a while, and I think it's true. I think there's something about its location in the Midwest, the fact that it is both extremely urban, but also suburban, and also you don't have to go very far and you hit farmland. That there's something about the character of the city that can be like a stand-in, I think, for America in so many ways, particularly urban America. And we were conscious of that, I think, in the making of the film, and we want that resonance to come through without, pushing it in a big way. And I think the events of George Floyd have only reinforced that. Is kind of what I think Zach's getting at, and you will certainly see that on display in this episode. But I think that we want viewers to watch this film who are not Chicagoans and look at it through the prism of their own lives and their own cities where they live, because we do think it has something to say to us all.
Yeah, it was refreshing to watch a film about politics that didn't have the overhang, the specific text overhang of Washington right now over it. These are, it's almost, not that the issues are invisible, but the political mechanics of the federal government and the president not being involved, and watching a 4-hour political film was sort of startling. And like, we're so used to having that dominate the discourse of political thinking, and here's local politics in action, people picking up the mantle and saying, I want to lead my city and my community. It was very powerful, I think. You made a conscious choice not to make it about the federal government and not have that in the film. But I don't know if you were expecting that sort of response of like breath of fresh air. Even as dysfunctional as Chicago is, and even as problematic as the process is, it did really feel like, like a chance to breathe and settle into watching people engage in political life in a different way than we're used to for the last 3 years.
Yeah, well, no, that's great to hear. I mean, I think that I think one of the things that's so kind of amazing about this election that we came through is that, yes, on the one hand, you can see some of the dysfunction playing out on a local level that certainly resonates in a national way. But, the other thing is someone became mayor who was at 2.8% with a month to go in the polls. And that's pretty darn inspiring that a person who had never held political office before could rise to lead the third largest city in America and be the first openly gay Black woman to do so. So all that's really inspiring at the same time. And I think that's the thing about Chicago. I think Chicago is it's sort of equal parts inspiring and infuriating as a place to live. There are so many things we just go, ah, and then there are so many things we go, Chicago. And, Chicago is the birthplace of community organizing in this country. And I think that shows up, what's going on around the country with all of the protests and stuff, that happens here a lot and has always happened here a lot. It's ramped up now, of course, because of the upheaval in George Floyd, but it's nothing new here. And you certainly see that on display in the first episodes, and you will see more of it in episode 5.
I was going to mention we are also screening as part of our virtual cinema Ashley O'Shea's Unapologetic at the festival, which is a really terrific companion piece to what Steve was just talking about. To our audience, if you haven't got a ticket for that one, you may want to. If you loved City So Real, I think you'd find it a really wonderful companion as well. So, final question: we've talked about episode 5. We've talked about episode 5 all of this time. What's the status? We know that the film itself is going to be on television soon. What's going on with episode 5, and sort of what's the story now that we know that Lori Lightfoot has been elected mayor of Chicago? And those who are engaged with the news will know that there's been a lot of unrest with the police in Chicago around her administration lately. So where will episode 5 take our audience, and how can they tell their friends to find City So Real after the festival?
Well, after the national broadcast on Nat Geo on the 29th, on the 30th, so they can tune in if they want to, if they want to do a marathon, commercial-free interruption, just watch the whole thing again and then watch episode 5. We won't stop you. But if you don't want to do that, you can catch it on Hulu the next day. The whole series will be available on Hulu. But yeah, I mean, this episode started out, the idea of this episode started out as to be a kind of postscript about the pandemic, just something pretty modest that we were going to do, mostly with Zoom interviews, right? To kind of like say, okay, here's how Chicago is dealing with the pandemic. And we thought it might just be a nice extra for whenever this aired. But once George Floyd happened, then it wanted to be expanded into a full-on episode in and of itself. And so we were out in the streets quite a bit and catching up with some of the people that you meet in the first 4 episodes to see how they're managing the pandemic and the upheaval, as well as meeting new people and ex-candidates, as well as Lori Lightfoot. And so it ends up being a film very much about this moment. I mean, it's so much about this moment, we're still filming it. And it's going to be on the air, in a month. I think that we're attempting to do something that really gets at the moment we're living in, that takes stock of Lori as mayor and the challenges that she faces, and which are prodigious. I think we're very excited about it. We feel like we've got something special with this episode, a great way to end the series.
I can't wait to see it. I watched it all in one sitting when we were given the opportunity to assess it for the festival, and I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning and finished at like 10:30 in the morning or something, and watched it all the way through. And I cannot wait for episode 5. It's going to be incredible. And what a project, what a career. We're so grateful that you brought this film to us, and we wish you all the best with this release and look forward to what's next. Thank you both for taking the time.
Thank you, and thank you for programming the series. Montclair, I was there a few years ago with the Ebert film, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's a great festival. I'm sorry you can't have it in person, but great that you're soldiering
the next
on
best thing.
and doing it. The next best thing. Yeah.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day and good luck finishing.
Thank you.
Take care.